Hey friends, tonight we begin in the flickering silence of ancient Rome, where love letters were etched in wax, feelings were political liabilities, and the bathhouse crush you've seen 3 days in a row might just ruin your life. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy falling asleep to boring history for sleep. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always moving to see where these stories find you, whether you're wide awake after a long shift, drifting off after a hard day, or just in need of a little peace tonight. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are in Rome, and today you're falling in love, or trying not to. You were born into a world where alliances were forged, not feelings. The air in your childhood home, a domus of cool marble and echoing halls, always carried the scent of polished bronze and dried herbs. From the earliest whispers overheard from your nursemaids, you understood that your life, and indeed your very heart, was not entirely your own. If you were elite, you didn't choose to date. Your family likely arranged it over a banquet while you were still learning Latin declensions. The drone of your tutor's voice a constant counterpoint to your mother's hushed negotiations. Your parents, stern-faced and pragmatic, saw your future not as a canvas for love, but as a ledger for political and economic gain. Each sigh over a particularly difficult grammar lesson was, in its own quiet way, a sigh for a life already largely decided. It was also terribly efficient, you had to admit, though efficiency rarely left much room for fluttering pulses or stolen glances. Perhaps your circumstances were different. If you were among the poor, living in a bustling insula where the scent of baking bread and communal waste mingled in the narrow streets, marriage was more flexible, often informal, and based on cohabitations, no elaborate ceremony needed. The rustle of neighbours' tunics just beyond your shared wall, the muffled laughter and quiet arguments offered a constant soundtrack to a less constrained form of courtship. Dating happened more freely in lower classes, where women had more say and fewer senators breathing down their necks. You might have met your future partner by the communal well, or perhaps during the boisterous chaos of the market. A casual brush of hands over a basket of olives, a shared smile over a particularly bad joke from a street vendor. There was a raw, immediate quality to these connections, free from the suffocating weight of family prestige. A pragmatic sort of romance, you might call it. The pressure to couple, regardless of your station, was relentless. Being single too long, social shame was real, a quiet, insidious hum of disapproval that followed you like a shadow. Emperor Augustus literally punished celibacy, seeing it as a dereliction of civic duty. There was a certain irony, you always thought, in being legally compelled to find someone to share your bed, regardless of whether you shared your soul. Love wasn't just a personal issue, it was a patriotic duty. You were a cog in the grand machinery of Rome, and your personal happiness was, at best, a secondary consideration. The chill of that societal expectation settled deep in your bones, a constant low thrum beneath the surface of daily life. It was a bleak sort of obligation, but then, so was most of existence under the unblinking eye of the Roman state. The education you received, or rather the lack thereof when it came to matters of the heart, was a peculiar thing. For boys, the curriculum was clear: history, rhetoric, philosophy, and of course the works of Ovid. Boys learned seduction from Ovid, who was essentially Rome's first dating coach, his Art of Love, a scandalous, delightful manual on how to woo, how to keep, and rather unhelpfully, how to lose. You remember hunched over a scroll, the faint smell of papyrus and dust, translating verses that detailed the art of the subtle glance at the theatre, the precise moment to offer a drink, the eloquent lie. It was all very academic, detached, yet you knew these were the supposed tools for navigating the bewildering world of Roman affection. A truly comprehensive guide, you had to concede, until Emperor Augustus exiled him for teaching too well. Apparently there was a fine line between educating the populace and undermining public morals, a rather inconvenient truth for those attempting to master the art of the chase. Girls, however, were on an entirely different curriculum. For them, it was a rigorous training in modesty, weaving, and dowry-maximising charm. No, how to flirt scrolls for them. Their education focused on the virtues of the dutiful wife, managing a household, overseeing servants, bearing strong Roman children. You might have seen your sister, or a friend, meticulously practicing her embroidery, her expression placid, her posture perfect, all designed to make her seem the ideal, demure Roman matron. The subtext was always clear. Attractiveness was less about personal allure and more about societal value. Your role was to be a beacon of virtue, a vessel for reputation. Any personal desires were, presumably, to be neatly tucked away beneath the folds of your stola. There was no formal schooling on relationships. Instead, you observed your parents' awkward political marriage and hoped for better. The air in your home often felt thick with unspoken resentments and carefully maintained decorum. You learned more from the strained silences at dinner than from any grand pronouncements. It was a strange, silent education, gleaned from the cold efficiency of arranged alliances and the whispered gossip of the household servants. You watched, you absorbed, and you quietly despaired of ever finding true connection amidst the machinery of Roman society. In the vacuum of genuine guidance, people turned elsewhere. Love spells and magic amulets filled the gap. Aphrodisiacs, hair-binding charms, cursed tablets. Because if love won't find a way, maybe witchcraft will. You might have seen the elderly woman at the market, her face a roadmap of ancient wrinkles, selling small, crudely carved effigies tied with red thread, promising fidelity or conquest. The desperation in the eyes of those who bought them was palpable. It was a testament to the sheer, unyielding difficulty of forging genuine bonds in a society that valued property over passion. The quiet dread that settled in your stomach as you watched someone carefully bury a lead curse tablet, inscribed with the name, was a bleak understanding of the lengths to which people would go for control over something as elusive as another's heart. Your typical Roman day unfolded with the slow, deliberate rhythm of ancient life, yet beneath its surface hummed a constant, subtle pursuit. The scent of wood smoke from the household hearth would wake you before dawn, the air cool and damp. After a simple breakfast of bread, and perhaps some fruit, your thoughts would inevitably turn to the day's opportunities. Flirting happened at the public baths, in the forums, or during festivals, especially Saturnalia, the Roman version of anything goes. You'd navigate the bustling crowds of the forum, the cacophony of vendors hawking their wares, the low drone of political debates. Your eyes would scan discreetly for a familiar face, a captivating profile, a glimpse of the individual you sought. It was a game of calculated chance, each interaction a potential move in an elaborate silent dance. The stone beneath your sandals felt cool, solid, a stark contrast to the volatile emotions bubbling beneath the surface of the city. The letters were exchanged via servants, who definitely read them. You'd carefully pen your thoughts on a wax tablet, the stylus scratching softly as you formed each Latin word. The scent of warm wax, slightly acrid, would rise to your nostrils as you pressed the stylus into the soft surface. Then came the agonizing wait. You'd hand the tablet to a trusted servant, knowing full well that discretion was a luxury rarely afforded to those who served. The nervous energy would build as you anticipated their return, each passing moment stretching into an eternity. You could almost feel their gaze on your words, their silent judgment, or perhaps their quiet amusement. A truly private thought was a rare and precious commodity in Rome, and then there was the sensory reality of these encounters. Hygiene, questionable. The bathhouse was steamy and scented with olive oil, and everyone else's sweat. The air was thick, humid, with the constant splashing of water and the low murmur of conversation. While perhaps not the most romantic of settings, it was a place of public display, of casual nudity, where glances lingered and brief conversations could blossom into something more. Courting rituals included walking near your crush's house daily, complimenting her family's servants, or pretending to casually visit the temple she frequented. A delicate, almost absurd ballet of proximity and feigned indifference. You'd find yourself taking circuitous routes, prolonging your errands, simply to pass by a specific door, your heart a frantic drum against your ribs. The sensory cues were constant. The hot wax from sealing a love note, the sticky palms from anxiety as you approach someone, the warm bread stolen for a morning tryst, a furtive shared moment of sustenance. Or the rosewater lingering from a festival garland, a fleeting scent that could transport you back to a moment of intoxicating possibility. Every sensation, every small detail, became imbued with meaning, a secret language spoken between glances and hushed whispers. The sheer, vibrant intensity of daily life, even in its most mundane moments, was amplified by the underlying current of yearning and desire. The tools of affection in ancient Rome were less about grand gestures and more about subtle signals, carefully chosen and deployed. What people think this life is like. Toga-clad lovers serenading each other under the moonlight with lyres, versus what it really is. It was far more pragmatic, far more precarious. The instruments you used to navigate this intricate dance of desire were often surprisingly mundane, yet held immense power. Your writing tools, styluses, wax tablets, papyrus scrolls, all easily intercepted. You would press the stylus into the softened wax, the faint scent of beeswax filling your nostrils, shaping words that you hoped would convey yearning or wit. Each letter formed was a calculated risk. For a curious servant, a nosy family member, or even a rival could easily read your most intimate confessions. The vulnerability of putting your desires into such an accessible form was a constant, quiet dread. You learned to write with a certain guarded elegance, hedging your bets, never revealing too much, lest your heart be laid bare for public amusement. Then there was your fashion, scratchy woolen stolas, strategically pinned togas. A well-draped fold could say, "I'm single," and jewellery that hinted at wealth or availability. The feel of rough wool against your skin was a constant companion. For a man, the way your toga draped, the subtle positioning of its folds, could be a silent declaration, a statement of your status and perhaps your marital eligibility. For a woman, the richness of her stola, the sparkle of a small brooch could draw an eye, a silent invitation across a crowded room. These weren't just clothes, they were carefully constructed disguises, or rather, carefully constructed advertisements. The lies you wore were often more revealing than any truth you spoke. Cosmetics, Women used lead-based powders, kohl eyeliner, and saffron rouge. The smell? Somewhere between earthy and alarming. You might have watched a woman painstakingly apply her makeup, the faint metallic scent of lead wafting from the small pot, the vibrant orange of saffron a stark contrast against her skin. It was a transformation, a quiet ritual of adornment, designed not necessarily for comfort, but for effect. A painted face was a mask, carefully crafted to present an ideal, to capture a fleeting gaze. And of course, the love tokens, rings, carved gems, even shared poetry scrolls. A small, intricately carved gem, perhaps depicting Cupid or a pair of doves, offered in a trembling hand. A scroll of verses, carefully copied, its edges perhaps softened by repeated handling. These were tangible expressions of a fragile hope, small anchors in a sea of uncertainty. But when all else failed, or when the stakes felt impossibly high, there were the darker tools, spells and charms, figurines tied with a red thread, inscribed lead curse tablets buried in graves or tossed into wells. The chill of the underground, the damp earth clinging to your fingers as you buried a small lead tablet, its surface etched with arcane symbols and a whispered name. Or the eerie sight of a small doll, bound with red thread, representing a rival, left in a hidden corner. These were desperate measures, born of profound longing or bitter jealousy, a silent acknowledgement that human connection was often beyond control, beyond reason, and sometimes even beyond hope. The reality of Roman affection was far less romantic and far more desperate than the myth suggested. The daily performance of dating in ancient Rome was less a serene courtship and more a series of tactical manoeuvres, each laden with subtle risk. You'd wake early, the first rays of sun slanting through the high windows to the distant murmur of the city stirring. After a quick wash and a generous application of olive oil, perhaps you'd recite some poetry aloud just in case anyone important was walking by. A little performance never hurt, did it? It was all about projection, about presenting the carefully curated version of yourself you wished others to see. Your duties often involved navigating public spaces with a hidden agenda. You might try to bump into someone attractive at the forum or market, maybe ask about olives while flexing a bit, or feign interest in a particular scroll. The crowds were a perfect cover, allowing for accidental touches, prolonged glances, and carefully orchestrated proximity. You learn to read the subtle cues, a lingering look, a slight incline of the head, a hand held just a moment too long. It was a silent conversation, unfolding amidst the cacophony of commerce and civic life. The stone underfoot, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, felt both ancient and complicit in these fleeting, hopeful encounters. Once a connection was made, the next step was always fraught. You might send a note via servant, wait nervously. The silence after the servant departed felt immense, the air thick with unspoken anticipation. Each minute stretched, an eternity of what-ifs. Or perhaps you'd attend a lavish banquet, the air heavy with the scent of roasted meats and expensive wines, and find excuses to share wine cups, your fingers brushing theirs as you reached for the same amphora. The easy laughter, the clinking of glasses masked the underlying tension of your personal quest. If you were wealthy, you might hire entertainers or musicians to impress, transforming a simple evening into a spectacle designed to woo. The melodies of a lyre or the graceful movements of a dancer became extensions of your unspoken desires, a luxurious display of your resources and, by extension, your devotion. If you were poor, your best hope was charm and clean tunic folds, a quick wit and a genuine smile. Your wealth lay not in gold, but in your character, your ability to captivate with words and genuine presence. For women, the battlefield was often more subtle, yet no less perilous. It was about subtle glances, modesty, real or feigned, and strategic appearances at religious festivals. The vibrant chaos of a festival, the heady scent of incense and garlands, offered opportunities for brief, sanctioned interactions. A lowered gaze, a blush carefully cultivated, a demure smile. These were the weapons in a woman's arsenal, designed to attract attention without inviting scandal. Every move was a negotiation, a tightrope walk between allure and propriety. The quiet dread of being misjudged, of a reputation tarnished by a single misstep, was a constant companion. The echoes of a failed courtship in ancient Rome lingered long after the initial silence, a cold draught on the soul. The stakes were high, for a misstep in matters of the heart could reverberate through your social standing, staining not just your own name, but that of your entire family. For women, the consequences were particularly harsh. Flirt too boldly, and risk being labelled infamia, socially disgraced. The weight of that word, infamis, hung in the air like a shroud, a mark that could deny you entry into respectable society, that could close doors and extinguish futures. You could feel the eyes of the matrons on you, their whispers like shards of ice. For men, while perhaps less severe, the judgment was still potent. Too much flirting could make you seem unserious or morally lax, a problem under Augustus' reforms. The emperor's stern hand reached into every corner of Roman life, even the bedroom. A reputation for frivolousness could undermine your political ambitions, make you seem unreliable in business, or simply mark you as a man who valued pleasure over duty. The disapproving cluck of an elder statesman, the cool dismissal from a potential patron, these were the quiet rejections that could subtly erode your standing. And then there was the ever-present shadow of transgression. Affairs were common, but discretion was key. Getting caught could mean exile, or worse, forced divorce. The fear of discovery was a constant low thrum in the background of illicit passion. The rustle of a servant's tunic in the hallway, the sudden creak of a floorboard, could send a jolt of ice through your veins. The political wives of Rome often conducted their liaisons with a cold, calculating precision, weighing the risks against the fleeting pleasures. But for those less skilled in deception, the consequences were swift and brutal. Exile, a forced separation from everything you knew, or a public, humiliating divorce that would leave you adrift and scorned. Public gossip was relentless. The walls of Rome, both literal and metaphorical, seemed to whisper your secrets. Graffiti on Pompeii walls included notes like, "Successus loves Iris, who doesn't return his affection." Too bad. Imagine that, your heartbreak etched in stone for all eternity, mocked by strangers, your quiet humiliation broadcast for the public square, the utter vulnerability of your private pain, made public, laid bare for judgment. And finally, the quiet, devastating impact of failed courtships, especially if dowries were involved. A dowry was not just money, it was a symbol of family honour, a commitment. A courtship that collapsed after a dowry had been discussed or even partially exchanged could inflict a deep wound on a family's reputation, a financial and social setback that would linger for generations. The cold calculation of the Roman marriage market meant that rejection was not just personal, it was also economic, a blight on the family ledger. The quiet dread of bringing such shame upon your kin was a heavy burden. pressing down with the weight of tradition and expectation. The chill of a Roman evening often brought with it the quiet, lingering echoes of what might have been or what had been lost. When it ended, whether in quiet resignation or public disgrace, the question remained: what happens when it ends? Are you remembered, erased, forgotten? What legacy remains? For many, especially those who navigated the precarious world of aristocratic alliances, a failed courtship or a discreetly ended affair might simply fade into the background, a minor ripple in the vast ocean of Roman social manoeuvring. You learn to bury the sting, to present a placid face to the world, to move on to the next strategic encounter. The memory of a fleeting touch, a shared smile, would become a personal secret, carefully guarded, fading with the passage of time like the scent of old parchment. But for others, the end was a public spectacle, a brand. If you were truly infamous, your name might be quietly erased from polite conversation, your presence avoided, your very existence a source of discomfort. You would become a ghost in your own city, seen but not acknowledged, heard but not listened to. The quiet dread of this social death was often worse than any physical punishment. To be forgotten, to be utterly irrelevant in a society built on reputation and familial ties, was a profound and lingering torment. Your legacy, if any, would be a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones, a dark mark on your family's otherwise spotless record. Perhaps you were one of the unlucky ones, your heartbreak etched into the public consciousness by crude graffiti. Successus loves Iris, who doesn't return his affection. Too bad. Imagine seeing that, your tenderest vulnerability, immortalized on a stone wall, exposed to the cruel amusement of passers-by. The cold, hard stone of Rome offered no solace, only a stark, permanent record of your personal failure. Your sorrow became a public entertainment, a fleeting diversion for anonymous eyes. And even for those who navigated the treacherous waters of Roman courtship with apparent success, the ending was often not one of romantic bliss. The goal, ultimately, was not emotional fulfillment, but stability, lineage, and property. Failed courtships could damage family reputation, especially if dowries were involved. The financial and social repercussions often outweighed any personal heartache. A marriage, even a successful one, was a contract, a political and economic alliance, far more than a union of souls. The aftermath, then, was often a cold assessment of gains and losses, a quiet calculation of how best to proceed. The wind sighs through the crumbling ruins of what was once a grand domus, a silent witness to countless desires, countless heartbreaks. The stones have seen it all, the grand passions and the petty betrayals, the arranged marriages and the illicit liaisons. In their silence they tell a story of human yearning, always complicated, always vulnerable, always subject to the harsh, unyielding dictates of Roman life. So if you ever feel awkward about modern dating apps, just remember, the Romans didn't have swipes, but they had servants reading your texts, graffiti judging your heartbreak, and emperors fining you for being single. It puts things into a bit of perspective, doesn't it? The endless scrolling, the fleeting connections, the polite rejections. Perhaps they're not so bad after all, when compared to the constant threat of public disgrace, or the chilling reality of an arranged marriage over a banquet. Somewhere in the shadow of a crumbling column, now softened by centuries of rain and sun, someone once sighed over unrequited love, while wearing far too much saffron. A fleeting image, a faint scent, a whisper of a forgotten name carried on the ancient breezes. Their anxieties, their hopes, their quiet despairs echo faintly through the ages, not so different from our own. Love, in any era, is a complex, often bewildering and profoundly human endeavour. Somewhere a wax tablet cools by an open window. Somewhere a name once whispered in hope is now etched into stone. And tonight, as the rain softens the streets of ancient Rome, you sleep beneath its memory. Tonight, we step through the mist-shrouded dawn of a world where honour was carved from timber and stone, and a man's worth was measured in the strength of his arm and the breadth of his lands. You are here, in a world not so unlike our own, yet vastly different in its quiet complexities. The air is crisp with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth, carrying whispers from a time when the deepest bonds were forged not with sweet words alone, but with the clatter of steel, the bleating of a goat, and the solemn weight of a shared future. Forget the gentle proposals of our modern age, the soft glow of a diamond. Here in the Viking Age, the declaration of eternal commitment was a declaration of resources, of lineage, of survival itself. It was a pragmatic poetry, etched in the stern faces of elders in the glint of an axe, yet imbued with a profound human yearning for connection. This was not a world of grand romantic gestures in the way we understand them, but one where love was woven into the very fabric of daily life, a sturdy thread in the tapestry of a shared existence. You stand on the cusp of a decision that will define your future, and perhaps the future of your kin. You were born into the scent of wood smoke and the rhythmic creak of a longhouse, a child of the fjord, the forest, or the coastal plain. Your cradle was likely a simple wooden box, nestled close to the hearth, and your lullabies were the howling wind and the distant bleating of sheep. From your earliest memories, the world was a practical place. Every hand had a task. Every season brought its demands. This wasn't a society built on individual whims, but on the strength of the collective, the family, the clan. Your very existence was part of a larger, intricate web of obligations and alliances. For many, especially those with even a modest amount of land or influence, marriage was rarely a matter of individual passion alone. It was a strategic alliance, a blending of resources, a solidification of power. Your parents, and their parents before them, understood that a well-chosen match could mean fertile land, a strong arm in a feud, or a more secure future for your descendants. They weren't being cold, they were being practical. Survival, after all, was a family affair. Imagine the discussions around the hearth, the quiet negotiations over bowls of stew, as your elders considered which neighbouring family had a daughter of good stock, with strong hands and a sensible mind, and perhaps a dowry of well-fed cattle. But it wasn't always so rigidly preordained. While the powerful manoeuvred for alliances among the common folk, those with less land and fewer goats to bargain with, love matches were certainly not unheard of. Perhaps you had seen it in your own village, a young man and woman, their eyes lingering a moment too long at the well, a shared laugh that carried more warmth than usual across the assembly. These were often quieter unions, born of proximity and shared hardship, where the practicalities were simpler: two strong backs, a willingness to work, and a hopeful heart. Your family, if they were of modest means, might have less leverage, but also less pressure. Their main concern would be that your chosen partner was not lazy, not sickly, and certainly not a sworn enemy of your kin. The gods, they would say, favour a strong union, whether by design or by serendipity. So, you find yourself at a crossroads. Perhaps your parents have subtly, or not so subtly, steered you towards a particular family, a daughter whose reputation for weaving or brewing is as solid as her father's timber. Or perhaps your own eyes have fallen upon someone at the last market day, someone whose laughter echoed through the bustling crowd, or whose quiet grace by the river caught your breath. The path ahead, whether arranged or self-chosen, is fraught with its own unique set of customs and expectations. You are, after all, a product of your time, a time when a proposal was less about a single question and more about a complex, intricate dance of honour, resources, and the quiet, enduring hope for a shared future. It's almost like a very slow, very polite hostage negotiation, but with more mead. Formal schooling was a concept as foreign as summer snow to your people. There were no academies for young lovers, no scrolls detailing the intricacies of a proper proposal. Instead, your education in courtship was steeped in the very air you breathed, the stories you heard and the lives you observed. For a young man, much of this informal training came from the schools. Imagine sitting by the fire on a long winter's night, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls, as a skald, a poet historian, recites tales of heroes and heroines. He would sing of Egil Skallagrimsson, perhaps, a warrior and poet who might have been fierce in battle but whose verses could also speak of love and longing. You would learn not from direct instruction, but from the heroic sagas, the Eddic poems, stories of gods and mortals, of love gained and love lost, of cunning plans and brave deeds. These tales, often filled with grand pronouncements and bold actions, subtly informed your understanding of what was desirable, what was honourable, and what might win a maiden's favour. They taught you to speak with purpose, to act with conviction, and to perhaps compose a verse or two, however clumsy, for the object of your affection. It was a curriculum of osmosis, soaked in by candlelight and whispered gossip. You also learned by observation. Your uncles, your older brothers, even the village elders, you watched them, discreetly, as they interacted with women. You saw how a man might boast of a successful hunt, perhaps exaggerating the size of the boar, or recount a trading voyage to distant lands, highlighting his shrewdness. These were their attempts at subtle, or not so subtle, courtship, displaying their prowess, their resourcefulness, their ability to provide. There was a quiet humour in these observations. You'd see an uncle puffing out his chest a little too much, or hear a well-worn story about a raiding trip that somehow always ended with him looking heroic. You learned what worked, what didn't, and what simply earned a polite, if slightly bored, nod. For young women, the training was equally informal but equally pervasive. From a young age, they were immersed in the domestic arts, spinning wool, weaving cloth, preparing food, tending to the sick. These were not merely chores. They were essential skills for the running of a household, for the survival of a family. They were taught the value of industry, of resourcefulness, of managing a home with grace and efficiency. But alongside these practical lessons came the unspoken advice, the gentle reminders, often from mothers or grandmothers, about the qualities of a good husband. "He must have good land, child," they might murmur, "and a strong arm for the plough." Or with a wry smile, "Avoid a man with a questionable beard, my dear. It often indicates a questionable mind." There was no explicit instruction on how to flirt, but rather an emphasis on the virtues that would make a woman a desirable and respected wife: competence, loyalty, and a sensible disposition. You were taught to discern character, to look beyond surface charm, and to value stability over fleeting fancy. The subtle art of a well-maintained longhouse, they understood, was far more attractive than an empty boast. After all, a man could talk about his prowess all day, But if he couldn't keep a roof over your head and a fire in the hearth, what was he truly worth? It was a practical world, and even love had to serve a purpose beyond mere sentiment. Your days in the Viking Age were not dictated by clocks, but by the relentless rhythm of the sun, the seasons, and the pressing needs of survival. Life was woven from the threads of countless small, repetitive tasks, each contributing to the fabric of your existence. And within this mundane tapestry, the opportunity for courtship was often found in the stolen moments, the shared glances, the subtle overlaps of daily chores. Imagine the early morning, the longhouse still cool and quiet save for the crackling of the newly stoked fire. The air, heavy with the scent of wood smoke, old leather, and last night's stew, slowly begins to stir. You might be sharpening your axe, the rhythmic rasp of stone on metal filling the space, preparing for a day in the forest felling timber or splitting firewood. Or perhaps you're helping with the animals, leading the goats to pasture, their hooves clattering on the frozen ground or mucking out the byre, the earthy scent of straw and dung a constant companion. These were solitary tasks, but they brought you into the orbit of others. Catching glimpses of the one you desired wasn't a matter of planned dates, but of accidental proximity. You might see them at the well, drawing water, their strong arms working the rope, the water sloshing softly into the buckets. Your paths might cross at the stream, where laundry was beaten clean against smooth stones, the sound of fabric slapping water a common melody. Or perhaps at the communal grinding stone, where the rhythmic hum of grain being crushed into flour filled the air. These were brief, unscripted encounters, opportunities for a quick, shy smile, a fleeting exchange of words about the weather or the health of the crops. If luck or perhaps subtle strategizing was on your side, you might find ways to extend these encounters. You could offer to help carry a heavy load of firewood, your hands brushing accidentally as you both grasp the rough logs. A shared laugh over a clumsy goat, or a knowing glance as a child toddles past, might be the extent of your romantic interactions for days. The air, as you went about your day, was a constant mix of earthy scents, the pungent aroma of fermented fish drying in the sun, the sweet musky smell of sheep's wool, the metallic tang of fresh blood from a recent hunt. These were the perfumes of your world, an unromantic backdrop to the quiet burgeoning of affections. Picture the scene by the longhouse fire in the evenings. The day's labour done, families gathered, sharing food and stories. You might sit across from them, the flickering firelight illuminating their face, making their hair glow like spun gold or burnished copper. Your eyes would meet over the rim of a shared drinking horn, a silent communication passing between you in the warmth and quiet of the communal space. Perhaps you would discreetly exchange a small carved token, a piece of polished bone, a finely etched comb, a small intricate bead. These weren't grand gestures, but whispers of affection in a world that valued practicality and discretion. A shared drinking horn offered with a particular tilt of the head, a hand reaching for the same piece of bread. These were the subtle, unspoken cues of burgeoning interest. It was a slow dance, dictated by the rhythms of the sun and the demands of survival, where romance was a fragile bloom, nurtured in the quiet spaces between work and sleep. It was, shall we say, less Netflix and chill, and more Norse and chores. When you imagine a Viking Age proposal, your mind might conjure images of grand, sweeping gestures, perhaps a valiant warrior laying spoils at the feet of his beloved, or a chieftain offering a bejewelled arm ring. The sagas, after all, are full of such dramatic pronouncements, but the reality, like most realities, was far more grounded in the practicalities of everyday life, and the gear you brought to a proposal was less about sparkle and more about substance, security, and a very clear message about your ability to provide. Foremost among your proposal kit, if you were a man of any standing, was a good sword, or a well-forged axe. This wasn't a symbolic gesture of protection, but a very literal one. A finely crafted weapon spoke volumes about your status, your skill in battle, and thus your ability to defend your household and your family's wealth. It was a tangible asset, a tool of survival, and a statement. I am capable, I am strong, and I can protect what is ours. It was the Viking equivalent of a robust retirement plan, but with more edge. Imagine polishing the blade until it gleamed, the steel catching the firelight, its cold weight a testament to your preparedness. It said, without words, I am a man of substance, capable of defending my kin and yours. Beyond the gleaming steel, the true bedrock of any Viking Age proposal was the bride price. This was not a payment for the bride herself, but a compensation to her family for the loss of her labour and her contribution to their household. This bride price could take many forms: animals, a herd of sturdy goats, a clutch of fat pigs, a well-bred horse; land, a fertile field, a patch of good pasture, or silver and valuable goods, ingots, finely woven textiles, perhaps even exotic furs obtained through trade. This was the true dowry, the tangible demonstration of your wealth and your commitment to supporting your future wife and family. It was less about romance and more about establishing a solid economic foundation. Picture leading a prime goat, its hooves clattering on the packed earth, towards her father's longhouse, a living, breathing testament to your intentions. Then there were the symbols, the smaller, more personal tokens. Braided hair ribbons, perhaps woven with intricate patterns, could be exchanged as signs of affection and commitment. An engraved comb, crafted from bone or wood, might be a subtle gift, a personal item used daily, a constant reminder of the giver. And of course, the shared drinking horn. This wasn't just a vessel for mead, it was a symbol of shared experience, of trust, of coming together. To drink from the same horn was an act of intimacy and camaraderie, a quiet promise of shared feasts and shared lives. Finally, your wardrobe upgrade. Forget fancy suits or silk ties. Your finest attire would be your cleanest tunic, likely made of good quality wool, perhaps even embroidered by your mother or sisters. This was not a flashy display of wealth, but a subtle presentation of respect and care. It showed you were not slovenly, that you had family who cared for you, and that you took pride in your appearance, within the confines of practical, durable clothing. It was the Viking equivalent of showing up to a job interview in a freshly pressed shirt. It might not win you the job, but it certainly wouldn't hurt. The reality, you see, was far less about grand romantic notions and far more about demonstrating your capacity to build and sustain a household, to provide security, and to uphold your family's honour. Because in a world of harsh winters and constant threats, a sturdy roof and a full belly were the truest expressions of love. A Viking Age proposal was rarely a battle in the literal sense, though it certainly involved strategic manoeuvres and a strong will. Your primary confrontation wasn't with an enemy on the battlefield, but with the venerable, often formidable, family of your beloved. This was where the duties truly began, a complex dance of respect, negotiation, and the presentation of your worth. The first and perhaps most crucial step was to approach her family first, specifically her father or the head of her household. This was an act of profound respect. To go directly to the woman would be a grave insult. suggesting you disregarded her family's authority and honour. You would come not with flowers, but with a carefully considered offering, laid out with solemnity. This wasn't merely a gift, it was the start of the bride price negotiation, a tangible demonstration of your intent and your capacity to provide. Imagine laying out a prime goat, perhaps its coat gleaming from a recent brushing, its tether held firmly in your hand. Beside it, perhaps a small heavy pouch of silver coins, or a fine piece of carved timber, carefully chosen to impress. This was your opening statement, a silent declaration of your earnestness. The discussions that followed would be sober and practical. Your family's reputation, your own skills and character, your land holdings, all would be weighed. There would be questions, perhaps probing ones, about your ability to provide, to protect, to honour her family. This was less a romantic overture and more a business negotiation with high stakes, conducted over shared meals and many cups of mead. The air would be thick with unspoken expectations, with the weight of generations of custom. You would need to demonstrate not just affection, but competence and responsibility. If the negotiations went well, and both families agreed to the union, the next major duty was the hand-fasting ceremony. This was the formalization of the betrothal, a public declaration of intent, often witnessed by the community. It wasn't the full marriage, but a binding agreement. You and your intended would join hands, often with a cord or strip of cloth binding them, symbolizing your pledged commitment. This was often accompanied by toasts, blessings from elders, and inevitably gossiping elders. While solemn, there was also an element of community celebration. The whole village would be present, observing, judging, and quietly celebrating the union of two families. It was the public seal on a private agreement, and once hands were joined, breaking the betrothal was a serious matter. Then came the procession, a duty that blended solemnity with a touch of communal merriment. The bride, perhaps with her hair unbound, a symbol of her transition to womanhood, would be led, often by her father, to your home. And then, the final slightly awkward duty, being walked to bed in front of everyone. This wasn't a voyeuristic spectacle, but a public witnessing of the consummation, ensuring the legitimacy of the marriage and the future heirs. It was a deeply personal act made public, underscoring the communal nature of marriage in the Viking Age. It was less about individual passion and more about lineage, continuity, and the strength of the community. So you see, getting married was not just about winning a heart. It was about navigating a labyrinth of social duties, economic expectations and public declarations, all under the watchful, assessing eyes of your entire community. No pressure then. The culmination of a Viking Age proposal, whether it led to joyous union or a quiet dissolution, had profound consequences that rippled through the social fabric of your community. This was not a world of individual isolation. Every action, every decision, especially one as significant as marriage, had a communal echo. If a match fell through, perhaps due to disagreements over the bride price or a shift in family alliances, reputations could suffer immensely. This was particularly true for the bride. Her eligibility might be questioned, her standing diminished. She might be seen as less desirable, and her chances of a good marriage in the future could be severely impacted. For the man, it might be less outwardly damaging, but his family's honour could be bruised, their negotiation skills doubted, and their future prospects for alliances with that particular family, or indeed other powerful families, might be hampered. Imagine the quiet whispers by the hearth, the subtle avoidance in the market, the knowledge that your family had failed to secure a desired union. It wasn't just a personal setback, it was a blot on the family ledger. Premarital intimacy, while certainly not forbidden by strict religious dogma, this was pre-Christian Scandinavia after all, still needed discretion. A certain amount of getting to know you was tolerated, even expected, particularly if a betrothal was already in place. However, the line was thin. An unwed pregnancy was a serious scandal. A child born outside of a recognised union could be a burden on the mother's family, and the child itself might face social stigma, potentially even being exposed, left to the elements if the family could not or would not care for it. This was a harsh reality, reflecting a society where every birth had implications for inheritance, lineage, and the strength of the collective. The casual hookup of today would have had very, very serious consequences. Marrying without parental or family approval was possible, especially among those with fewer assets or lower social standing, where the economic implications were less dire. But it was risky. A father with a spear wasn't someone you wanted to surprise with an unapproved bride. Such a union could lead to estrangement from your kin, loss of inheritance, and a lack of support in feuds or times of hardship. You would be on your own, a precarious position in a world where community was survival. These sagas are full of tales of brave, foolish lovers who defied their families, but these stories often end not in idyllic happiness, but in tragedy, exile, or protracted feuds. Freedom of choice then came with a heavy, sometimes deadly price. So, whether your proposal met with success or failure, the aftermath was never insignificant. A successful union meant a marriage alliance, mutual respect forged in shared labour, warm furs in winter, and the promise of a growing family. It meant children to tend the land, to wield the axe, to continue the lineage. It meant a deeper connection to your community, a stronger position within the intricate web of families. Failure, on the other hand, could mean disputes over property, cattle theft as a form of reprisal, or worse, being remembered in a saga not as a hero, but as the one who got rejected with a goat. Your legacy, or lack thereof, could be etched in the collective memory, a cautionary tale whispered by the fire. Either way, love in the Viking Age was a delicate yet immensely weighty balance of pragmatism and poetry, of economic necessity and genuine human connection. It was all wrapped in wool, sealed with a handshake, or a hand fasting, and ultimately shaped by the raw, unvarnished realities of a demanding world. It was a proposal that asked not just for a heart, but for a whole way of life. Now, close your eyes and drift. The hearth has gone quiet. A single candle flickers against the stone, its flame a tiny beacon in the vast darkness. Your breath, slow and steady, fades into history. You have journeyed to a time when love was not a fleeting emotion, but a profound commitment, woven into the very fabric of survival. Sleep well, knowing that love once required swordsmanship, the steadying hand on a goat's tether, and a tolerance for salted herring. It was a different kind of romance, one built on sturdy foundations and unspoken understandings. The Vikings may not have had fields of roses or eloquent love letters written on parchment. They had loyalty, fierce and unyielding. They had intricately carved leather bracelets, exchanged as tokens of affection. And they had the occasional heartfelt rune stone, etched with a name, a memory, a promise carried through the centuries. And perhaps, in a world that often feels too fast, too fleeting, There is something to be learned from those who built their unions on the solid ground of shared labour, mutual respect, and the quiet promise of enduring presence. And hey, if someone ever gifts you a goat, maybe say yes. You never know where eternal commitment might begin. Tonight, we don't step through frost-covered doors into a longhouse where silence carries the weight of survival. Instead, we drift back across millennia, to a land where sun-drenched marble gleamed under an impossibly blue sky. A place where the scent of olives mingled with sea salt, and the murmur of philosophers blended with the rustle of papyrus scrolls. You are there, standing on cobblestone worn smooth by generations of sandals, the distant echo of a lyre reaching your ears. You might picture an easy grace, a world of flowing robes and eloquent pronouncements. And yes, there was some of that. But beneath the veneer of philosophical discourse and artistic grandeur, the human heart beat with the same ancient rhythm, complicated by an entirely different set of rules. This was a world where passion and practicality danced a slow, intricate tango, where the pursuit of affection was less a casual swipe and more a carefully orchestrated performance. Forget the casual "just call me" or the fleeting glance across a crowded room. Here, attraction was a subtle art, a delicate negotiation, often a public spectacle. To find love in classical Greece was to enter a labyrinth of unspoken expectations, poetic declarations, and the occasional truly awkward encounter. It was, in essence, a romantic endeavour built on layers of social etiquette, philosophical ideals, and a profound, often hilarious lack of direct communication. You are born into this world, perhaps in Athens, in the 5th or 4th century BCE. Your fate, in matters of the heart, is largely predetermined by your gender and your family standing. If you're a man, your early life is a rigorous education, often spanning into your late 20s. You spend your days at the gymnasium, honing your body, but just as much time at the palestra, honing your mind. You're steeped in rhetoric, philosophy, and the epic tales of Homer. You dissect the tragedies of Aeschylus and Sophocles, learning the nuances of human emotion, even if direct expression of those emotions in public is largely frowned upon. Marriage, for you, is typically an arrangement, often made when you're pushing 30. It's less about romantic love and more about civic duty, ensuring the continuation of your household and lineage. Your wife, a young woman perhaps half your age, will be chosen for her dowry, her family connections, and her ability to manage a household. Not exactly the stuff of epic poetry, unless you count the epic struggle of learning to share your home with a near stranger. You might be expected to discuss the virtues of temperance with your philosophical peers, only to find yourself wondering if temperance also applies to the sheer volume of olive oil your new wife uses in the kitchen. If you are a woman, your journey into the world of wooing begins far earlier, and with significantly less autonomy. You are raised within the confines of the gynoeceum, the women's quarters, learning the domestic arts, weaving, managing servants, and overseeing the household. Your education, if you receive one, focuses on practical skills, not philosophy. You're betrothed, often at the tender age of 14 or 15, to a man who might be twice your age, possibly more. Your future husband is a figure glimpsed perhaps at a family gathering or a religious festival, but rarely someone you engage with directly before the wedding ceremony itself. Your emotional landscape when it comes to courtship is largely one of patient waiting, of quiet observation. Your family's honour, your husband's reputation, and the stability of the oikos, household, are paramount. Romantic love, as portrayed in the plays and poems, feels like a distant, often dangerous fantasy, far removed from the practicalities of daily life. The elite, the ones with enough leisure to even consider the nuances of affection, viewed love through a complex lens. Was it a divine madness sent by Eros, seizing the heart with an uncontrollable force, as Plato might suggest in the Phaedrus? Or was it a more pragmatic, controlled emotion, a necessary component of a harmonious society, as often implied in the pragmatic discussions of the symposium? Depending on which philosophical debate you eavesdropped on, love could be a noble pursuit of the ideal, a dangerous distraction from civic virtue, or simply a convenient way to ensure more citizens for the polis. Either way, swiping right was definitely not on the menu. So how exactly does one prepare for this elaborate dance of desire in ancient Greece? Well, if you were an aspiring male lover, your training was less about direct flirtation techniques, and more about cultivating a mind deemed worthy of admiration. You memorized Sappho, not for pickup lines, but for her exquisite lyrical passion, understanding the depths of human yearning. You studied Theocritus, whose bucolic idylls painted scenes of rustic love and longing, offering a glimpse into simpler, perhaps purer affections. And of course, Homer, always Homer, the grand narratives of heroes and gods, of Helen's beauty launching 1,000 ships. These weren't just stories, they were blueprints for understanding the epic scope of desire, even if your own romantic endeavours were more likely to launch a strongly worded poem than a full-scale war. It was less Netflix and chill, and more lyre and existential dread, often performed in public, with an audience judging your every strained note. Courting a woman, particularly one from a respectable family, was a rare and highly structured affair. It wasn't a casual pursuit. Direct contact was minimal, chaperones were ubiquitous, and any overt display of affection would be scandalous. Instead, you learned the art of indirect communication, a respectful distance, a well-placed compliment conveyed through a third party, perhaps a subtle glance exchanged at a religious festival, all spoke volumes. It was a game of whispers and implications, where restraint was key, and overzealousness could lead to immediate social condemnation. Imagine trying to flirt by only using allegories about olive presses. It required patience, and possibly a very good metaphor dictionary. Courting a male companion, on the other hand, particularly an older, more established man, the Erastes, by a younger, less experienced one, the Ermenos, was a different beast entirely. It was often poetic, intellectual, and intensely personal, yet still governed by strict social codes. This wasn't about casual hookups. It was often seen as a form of mentorship, an educational relationship where the older man would guide the younger, both intellectually and morally. The woo here involved philosophical discussions, shared intellectual pursuits, and the exchange of gifts, not always romantic, but certainly symbolic. You learned to debate, to articulate your thoughts eloquently, to perform physical feats at the gymnasium with grace, all as a means of impressing your potential companion. The goal wasn't just physical intimacy, it was the cultivation of virtue and a shared pursuit of the kalokagathia, the ideal of noble and good conduct. For women, the training for love was largely passive. You were secluded, your movements restricted to the home, and closely chaperoned outings for religious ceremonies or family events. Flirtation, if it happened at all, was a highly indirect affair. A passing glance could be charged with meaning. A gift of fruit, subtly offered, might carry a hidden message. A small carved figurine left at your door could speak volumes. You learned to read the subtle cues, the quiet gestures, the unsaid things that form the language of desire in a society where female agency in courtship was severely limited. Your education focused not on attracting a mate, but on managing a household, bearing children, and upholding your family's honour. Love, when it arrived, often did so through the practicalities of marriage, and any romantic inclinations were expected to blossom, if at all, within those established bounds. It was like being expected to write an epic poem with only 3 words in your vocabulary. So you're in the thick of it. The sun, a warm blanket, settles on your shoulders as you go about your day. How do you even begin to spot your intended, let alone initiate the elaborate ballet of ancient Greek wooing? If you are a man, your opportunities for encountering potential love interests are somewhat limited, especially if you're pursuing a respectable woman. You might catch a glimpse of her at a religious festival, where the usual social strictures are slightly relaxed, allowing for a fleeting glance across the bustling crowd. Perhaps at a family banquet, carefully arranged by your parents, where she's present with her female relatives, always chaperoned. Or, if you're particularly lucky or bold, you might spot her at the women's section of a temple, offering prayers to the gods. These are not opportunities as direct conversation, mind you, but for subtle observation, for the exchange of quick, darting glances that spoke volumes in a society where overt communication was forbidden. It's like trying to communicate a complex philosophical argument using only semaphore flags, and half the flags are missing. Your days, therefore, are filled with more indirect romantic labour. You might spend your mornings composing verses, carefully choosing your words to evoke admiration without being overly scandalous. These aren't just idle scribblings, they're your primary tool of courtship. You might practice your lyre, honing your musical skills to accompany your latest poetic offering. Imagine trying to serenade someone who might be listening behind a locked door, and you have to hope the acoustics are good. You might visit the gymnasium, not just for physical training, but to subtly display your physique, hoping a particular set of muscles catches the eye of a potential male companion. Offerings to Eros, the god of love, were also a daily ritual for the hopeful. A small sacrifice, a quiet prayer, a plea for divine intervention in the notoriously fickle realm of the heart. If you're a woman, your daily reality is much more constrained. Your world is primarily the oikos, the household. Your interactions are with your family, your servants, and perhaps other female relatives. Public life, for you, is rare and almost always chaperoned. Therefore, any romantic sparks ignited outside the strict confines of marriage would be incredibly daring and incredibly dangerous. Your spotting of a potential suitor would largely come through intermediaries, a gossip from a servant, a whispered comment from an aunt, or the subtle actions of your own family, who are diligently working behind the scenes to arrange your marriage. Your role in the daily dance of courtship is largely one of patience and demure observation, of waiting to be wooed. The sounds of love in ancient Greece were subtle, the whispers in courtyards as news of a suitor's intentions circulated, the shuffle of sandals on stone as a discreet messenger carried a gift or a poem, the soft strum of a lyre from a nearby house, accompanying a mournful love song. Love smelled like the wine poured at a symposium, perhaps loosening tongues and inhibitions, but usually diluted with water. It smelled of the sea breeze, carrying the promise of distant lands and adventures, or perhaps just the salty air from the nearby port, and it certainly smelled of warm fig bread, a common offering, perhaps left for a desired one, or enjoyed in solitude as you pondered your romantic fortunes. It was a sensory tapestry woven with subtlety, where even the most mundane elements of daily life could become imbued with the quiet intensity of unexpressed desire. When you think of ancient Greek wooing, you might picture grand pronouncements, epic love stories, or perhaps a god or two descending from Olympus to meddle. The reality, however, was a touch more grounded, and the gear of seduction often surprisingly mundane, yet imbued with profound symbolic weight. For the aspiring male lover, your arsenal wasn't about flashy displays. It was about artistry and intellectual appeal. The lyre was paramount, not just an instrument, but a voice. Learning to play it well, to accompany your own verses or classic odes to love, was a key skill. Imagine trying to impress someone with a mixtape, but you have to perform all the instruments and vocals live, right outside their house, with no auto-tune. Then there were the love poetry scrolls, meticulously transcribed, perhaps even your own compositions. These papyrus rolls were more than just words. They were physical manifestations of your intellect and emotion. Scented oils might be used to anoint your body, a subtle allure not overpowering, but hinting at refinement and care. A small polished bronze mirror was essential, not for vanity, but for ensuring your appearance was always presentable, reflecting a careful attention to detail. The myths often depicted gods and goddesses engaging in grand, overt romantic escapades, transforming into swans or golden showers to achieve their desires. The reality for mortals? Much less dramatic. There were no divine transformations. Your gear was humble, your approach subtle. Your gifts weren't glittering jewels from the depths of the ocean. They were often surprisingly simple, yet rich with meaning. A wreath of fresh flowers carefully woven could signify admiration and purity. Honey cakes, a symbol of sweetness and fertility, were a common and appreciated offering. Even a well-fed pigeon could be a gift, a sign of care and domesticity, or perhaps a messenger for a more direct but still discreet communication. These were not lavish displays of wealth, but thoughtful tokens, meant to convey sentiment without breaching social decorum. Beyond these tangible items, there were also highly symbolic tools of affection. A lock of hair, perhaps subtly obtained or offered, carried immense personal significance, a piece of oneself given to another. A delicate piece of jewellery, not necessarily expensive but chosen for its beauty or its symbolic motif, could be a lasting reminder. And perhaps most poetically, a laurel crown, the symbol of poetic victory or athletic achievement, tied loosely and presented to a beloved for a shared walk, subtly implying that the giver's triumphs were now shared with the recipient. The myth often presented love as a sudden, overwhelming force, a bolt from the blue. The reality was a slow, deliberate courtship, a series of small, significant gestures that built a connection over time. There was no instant gratification, no quick swipe. Each piece of gear, each subtle offering, was a carefully considered move in a long drawn-out game, a game where the greatest tool of all was patience, and the highest stakes were not just affection, but reputation and social standing. It was a world where a carefully chosen fig could speak louder than 1,000 shouted words of adoration. And probably lasted longer too, so you've gathered your courage, sharpened your wit, and perhaps even polished your lyre. Now comes the moment of truth. What does the actual job in action look like when you're trying to win someone's heart in classical Greece? Forget grand gestures in public squares. This was a war of attrition waged with carefully crafted subtlety. If you were a man, your duty was to initiate, to make your intentions known without ever truly stating them outright. This often involved composing a verse, usually after 2 cups of diluted wine, to loosen the poetic muse, but not so much that you started quoting Aristophanes at inappropriate volumes. This verse, a carefully constructed poem of longing or admiration, would then be entrusted to her servant, a discreet intermediary who would deliver it to your beloved's hands. Imagine putting your entire romantic future into the hands of someone who might also be tasked with cleaning out the stables. The suspense was probably agonizing. Alternatively, if your object of affection was another man, or if you simply favored a more physical display of virtue, you'd spend your time showing off at the gymnasium. This wasn't about crude flexing. It was about displaying your physical prowess with grace and control, hoping your idealized biceps or your impressive javelin throw caught someone's discerning eye. It was a performance, a silent advertisement of your physical and moral excellence, all under the watchful gaze of other aspiring admirers. You weren't just exercising, you were auditioning. For women, your role in this delicate dance was almost entirely one of reception and subtle response. Direct action was a social taboo. When a poem arrived, or a gift was left at your door, your response was rarely verbal. It was expressed through the subtlest of cues. Silence could be a powerful statement, either indicating disinterest or a demure contemplation. A faint blush on your cheeks, if observed by the messenger or by a watchful family member, could signify a burgeoning interest. Or perhaps the most passive-aggressive tactic of all, strategically not appearing for 3 festivals in a row where you knew your suitor would be present. This sent a clear message of unavailability, or perhaps a test of his persistence. It was a masterclass in non-verbal communication, where every averted gaze and every delayed appearance carried the weight of an entire unwritten conversation. The real battle wasn't a physical confrontation. It was a psychological and social one. The unspoken rules, the fear of public shaming, the constant pressure to maintain eidos, modesty or shame, and sophrosine, prudence or self-control. These were the formidable opponents. Every subtle move, every carefully chosen word, or lack thereof, was a maneuver on a social battlefield where reputation was everything. Success wasn't about conquest. It was about the delicate art of persuasion, the slow, gentle turning of a heart through indirect means. It was like trying to win a chess match by only moving your pawns 1 square at a time, and only when no one was looking directly at the board. So the delicate dance is played out. What happens when your romantic story reaches its climax, or perhaps its quiet, painful end? In classical Greece, the aftermath of a romantic endeavour carried significant weight, particularly when it came to social consequences. For women, the stakes were incredibly high. Illicit love, any romantic entanglement outside the strict bounds of a sanctioned marriage, could mean absolute ruin. Your reputation, the very foundation of your social standing, could be shattered. Divorce, though possible, often carried a heavy stigma, and a woman who had engaged in unapproved affairs might find herself ostracized, her future prospects and those of her family irrevocably damaged. Imagine a single whispered rumour echoing through the agora, capable of tearing down everything you and your family had painstakingly built. It was a constant, terrifying risk. For male poets, pushing the boundaries of romantic expression carried its own dangers. While celebrating love was encouraged, getting too bold in your declarations, or directing your verses at an inappropriate target, such as a married woman, could lead to severe social repercussions. Ask Anacreon, the famous lyric poet, who, despite his celebration of wine, women and song, faced accusations of impropriety and was eventually forced to leave his home city for a time. Public censure, exile, or simply the loss of social standing were real possibilities. It was a world where your artistic expression could lead to literally being run out of town. Yet despite these pervasive risks, love, in its various forms, was still deeply prized. It was celebrated in the tragedies and comedies, debated in the philosophical schools, and woven into the fabric of daily life. Even unrequited love, the most common outcome of any romantic pursuit, was seen as a noble form of suffering. It left you perhaps writing sad poetry alone on a sun-drenched porch, watching the light fade over the Parthenon. But even that pain, that yearning, was considered worthy of elegy, worthy of deep eternal sighs that echoed through the marble columns of history. The social cost was high, the risks ever present, but the pursuit of affection, even if it ended in failure, was never seen as trivial. It was an essential part of the human condition, a testament to the soul's capacity for longing. And while it might lead to your social downfall, at least you got some excellent material for your next lamentation. So, after all the subtle glances, the carefully couched poems, the anxious waits for a message that may never arrive, what did success and failure truly look like in the poetic wooing of classical Greece? Success, in its purest, most idealized form, meant your name on her lips. Not shouted from the rooftops, of course, but whispered in private, perhaps shared with a trusted confidant. It meant your poem, the one you agonizingly crafted, pinned to her wall, a silent testament to your devotion and her reciprocated interest. For the male suitor, the ultimate success could lead to a wedding, a grand affair, complete with music, feasting, and the ritual sacrifice of a goat. This wasn't necessarily a culmination of passionate love as we understand it today, but a joining of families, a union sanctioned by the gods and the polis, marking the successful navigation of a complex social labyrinth. It meant your efforts had borne fruit, quite literally, in the continuation of your lineage. But let's be honest, far more common than ringing wedding bells was the quiet sting of failure. The most prevalent outcome was unrequited heartbreak. Your carefully penned verses might be ignored, your subtle gestures unacknowledged, your very existence perhaps unnoticed by the object of your affection. This wasn't the dramatic rejection of a public confrontation. It was the slow, creeping realization that your efforts had simply faded into the ether. And what did this unrequited longing lead to? More poems, so many poems, lengthy odes to the pain of absence, the beauty of a fleeting glance, the cruel indifference of the beloved. The scrolls would pile up, filled with your yearning. You'd become quite the connoisseur of melancholic metre. Yet, in a strange paradox, even this pain, this exquisite suffering of unrequited love, was considered noble. It was deemed worthy of elegy, a form of poetry specifically designed to lament loss and sorrow. Your personal heartbreak, however agonizing, elevated you. It proved you possessed the capacity for deep emotion, for an idealized form of love, even if it was never fully realized. Your sighs, long and drawn out, echoing through the quiet courtyards, were not signs of weakness, but of a profound sensitivity. In a way, failure made you a more authentic artist, a more deeply feeling human. It was a strange consolation, to be sure, to know your misery was classic. So whether your efforts led to a wedding, or simply to a new stack of beautifully miserable verses, the pursuit of affection in classical Greece was never without meaning. It shaped you, refined you, and often made you a better poet. And if nothing else, you'd certainly have plenty to talk about at the next symposium, even if it was just how utterly beautifully heartbroken you were. Love in ancient Greece was rarely simple. It was a tapestry woven with philosophy and social obligation, with poetic yearning and practical realities. It was an intricate dance, less about spontaneous passion and more about calculated grace. But it was never ever boring. Next time you find yourself frustrated by a modern text message that goes unanswered, or a casual date that never materializes into anything more, take a quiet moment. Remember the Athenian of centuries past. Remember someone who once spent 3 entire days composing a sonnet about a smile glimpsed from across a temple courtyard, or who meticulously honed their javelin throw just to catch a discerning eye. Remember the quiet courage it took to send a whispered message, to offer a simple fig, to put your entire heart into a carefully chosen word, knowing the response might be nothing more than a demure blush, or perhaps nothing at all. Now, close your eyes and drift. The warm Athenian sun has set, casting long shadows across the ancient stones. The distant strum of a lyre fades into the night. Your breath, slow and steady, becomes one with the gentle rustle of papyrus leaves, carrying the echoes of forgotten verses and unrequited sighs. May your dreams be full of fig leaves, the soft strum of lyres, and perhaps just a few awkward stanzas that finally find their way to a receptive heart. Tonight we step through the heavy oaken doors of a manor where the scent of beeswax and dried herbs lingers in the air. You are a soul navigating the intricate, often treacherous dance of courtship in Tudor England. Forget the grand, sweeping gestures of courtly love, the kind whispered by poets in velvet cloaks. No, your reality is far more grounded, more intimate, and infinitely more perilous in its quiet details. You imagine Tudor love and conjure images of elaborate gowns rustling through moonlit courtyards, perhaps a king, stout and red-bearded, whispering sweet nothings into a lady's ear. But mostly it was the methodical scrape of a goose-feather quill, the faint metallic tang of iron gall ink, and the heart-stopping panic over a misplaced apostrophe. A smear on a carefully pressed wax seal wasn't just untidy, it was a social transgression, a silent scream of impropriety that could curdle burgeoning affection into a frosty disdain. The written letter, you see, was the closest thing they had to a whispered confession in the quiet of the night, a tinder message sent through muddy lanes and over windswept moors. But with far higher stakes, infinitely worse lighting, and the constant nagging fear of a nosy servant. A misplaced comma wasn't merely a grammatical error. It could unravel an entire courtship, shifting the delicate balance from swoon to scandal, from hopeful anticipation to crushing humiliation. Every word, every flourish, every delicate fold of parchment was a gamble, a tiny, fragile ship launched onto the unpredictable currents of Tudor society. You were born into a world where your future was often etched in the lines of your family's ledger, not in the beating of your own heart. Courtship was, more often than not, a meticulously arranged affair, a strategic alliance between families, a quiet negotiation over lands, titles, or a modest dowry. Your parents might discuss a potential suitor or a suitable match, while spoons clinked against pewter bowls at the breakfast table, as casually as they might discuss the next harvest. It wasn't always cold. Sometimes affection grew in the fertile ground of shared duty and mutual respect. But the initial spark often came not from Cupid's arrow, but from a calculated decision made by elders. If you were a son of a nobleman, a prosperous merchant, or even an ambitious apprentice, The ability to read and write with a certain elegance was a vital social currency. Love letters, in their purest, most heartfelt form, were largely the domain of the educated, the poets, the courtiers with a flair for the dramatic, and yes, the ambitious young men who understood that a well-penned verse could open doors and hearts. For many, marriage was a practical necessity, a means of securing status or continuing a lineage. But even within these confines, the human heart sought connection, sought expression, and found it in the slow, deliberate act of writing. Perhaps you were fortunate enough to meet your intended at a lively country fair, amidst the braying of livestock and the shouts of hawkers, or perhaps within the hushed solemnity of a Sunday service, where glances were exchanged across rows of pews, or if the fates were truly kind, at a lively village dance, where hands brushed and laughter mingled with the strains of a lute. It was there, in these fleeting moments of shared experience, that the long, often agonizingly slow process of written flirtation might begin. A subtle nod, a shared smile, and then the painstaking journey of conveying emotion, desire, and intention through ink and parchment. A journey fraught with silent questions, unspoken fears, and the exquisite agony of waiting. For boys of a certain standing, education was a rigorous affair. Your days might have been spent hunched over a desk in a chilly grammar school, the air thick with the scent of lamp oil and damp wool. You'd learn Latin, the language of scholars and the church, its intricate grammar and vast vocabulary shaping your very thoughts. Rhetoric, the art of persuasive speech and writing, was drilled into you, teaching you to construct arguments, to craft elegant phrases, and to express yourself with conviction. And of course, you'd learn to sign your name, not just legibly, but with a certain flair, a distinctive flourish that marked you as a man of substance, a man to be taken seriously. This training, while seemingly formal and detached, was the very bedrock upon which romantic correspondence would be built. Every declension, every turn of phrase could be deployed in the service of seduction, or at least polite admiration. For girls, formal schooling was less common, but no less essential was the quiet, persistent practice of literacy within the domestic sphere. Your lessons would often take place at home, under the watchful eye of a governess or a doting mother. You might spend hours hunched over a piece of scrap parchment, practicing your letters, your hand aching with the effort, the faint rustle of the paper, a constant companion. This practical skill was woven into the fabric of daily life, often alongside the more traditionally feminine arts of embroidery, needlepoint, and the intricate dance of household management. Crucially, you were also taught the subtle, often unspoken rules of social conduct, how to converse politely, how to carry yourself with grace, and perhaps most importantly, how not to offend a baron or a particularly haughty duchess. These lessons, while not explicitly about dating, were vital. They taught you the art of discretion, the power of a well-chosen word, and the dangers of a thoughtless one, all critical skills for navigating the delicate labyrinth of Tudor courtship. There were no handy how-to manuals on Tudor romance, no self-help guides to finding your true love. Instead, your guides were the weighty etiquette books, filled with prescriptive rules for behaviour, for dress, for conversation. And of course, there were the cautionary tales, the tragic lovers of literature, the star-crossed Romeo and Juliet, whose passion led to ruin, the doomed Troilus and Crusade, whose love withered under the weight of war and betrayal. These narratives served as both inspiration and warning. They offered a glimpse into the dizzying heights of romantic rapture, but also the precipitous depths of despair. You learned not from direct instruction, but from observation, from social cues, and from the quiet, internalized wisdom passed down through generations of discreet glances and carefully worded compliments. The act of writing, particularly a letter of any importance, and what letter was more important than one infused with burgeoning affection, was a deliberate, often solitary ritual. Your fingers would often be stained with ink, a permanent badge of your literary efforts. The air around you, especially on a long winter's evening, would be thick with the scent of beeswax candles, their flickering light casting dancing shadows on the wall, making even the most mundane word seem imbued with mystery. There was the ever-present fear of blotting your carefully chosen metaphor, of smudging a perfectly formed character, or of an errant drop of ink marring the pristine parchment. A single mistake could necessitate starting over, a fresh sheet, a fresh surge of anxiety. It was a slow, contemplative process, each word weighed, each phrase considered, before it was committed to the page, and then came the delivery. Unlike our instant messages and digital transmissions, a letter in Tudor England was a tangible object, a physical manifestation of your feelings, carried across miles by human hand. Often, it would be entrusted to a servant, a loyal page, or a trusted family member. And yes, people snooped. The very act of carrying a letter from one household to another was an invitation for curiosity, for whispered speculation. A servant might hold it up to the light, trying to discern the contents, or subtly feel the weight of its enclosure. Discretion was paramount for both sender and recipient, and the choice of messenger could speak volumes about the secrecy or openness of the communication, the reply. That was a matter of exquisite agony. It might take days for your carefully crafted sentiments to reach their destination, and then it might take even more days for a response to be penned, for a messenger to be found, for the return journey to be completed. Or it might never arrive at all. Welcome to the original ghosting Tudor style. The silent, prolonged absence of a reply spoke volumes, a chilling confirmation of disinterest, a cruel dismissal. The waiting itself was a test of patience, a crucible of hope and despair, each passing hour stretching into an eternity, each distant sound a potential harbinger of the longed-for knock at the door. Your primary tools, the humble instruments of courtship and connection, were far from romanticized. A goosefeather quill, its tip meticulously cut and recut with a penknife, was your weapon of choice. Its soft flexibility allowed for delicate lines and bold flourishes, but it required constant maintenance. An ink pot, usually made of earthenware or pewter, held the precious liquid, iron gall ink, a concoction of oak galls, iron sulphate, and gum arabic, which often started out as a pale blue and darkened to a rich black over time. Then there was the parchment itself, often made from calfskin or sheepskin, prepared to a smooth, almost translucent finish, each sheet folded with meticulous care to conceal its contents. And of course, the wax seals, small personal crests, a family emblem, or even a simple initial, pressed into molten wax to secure the letter and provide a visual assurance of its authenticity. A smudged or broken seal could betray impatience, carelessness, or, worst of all, that the letter had been tampered with. Beyond these basic necessities, a well-appointed love letter might include more intimate symbolic offerings. A sprig of dried rosemary, pressed flat against the parchment, could signify remembrance. A delicate pressed flower, perhaps a rose petal, spoke of enduring affection, or a small token, something personal and tangible, a lace ribbon, a single glove, or even a lock of hair carefully tucked within the folds of the letter. These were not mere trinkets. They were extensions of the self, silent declarations of intent, adding another layer of meaning to the already weighty words. Scented letters were very much a thing, a subtle, evocative layer of communication that appealed directly to the senses. Lavender, with its soothing aromatic qualities, was often used to signify longing, a gentle yearning for a presence. Rosemary, as mentioned, could mean remembrance, but also, perhaps more unsettlingly, grief. A risky choice for a romantic overture, perhaps, unless one wished to convey a sense of profound, almost mournful devotion. The subtle perfume emanating from a letter could hint at the sender's presence, their cleanliness, their sophistication, or even their emotional state. It was a quiet, intimate detail, easily overlooked by the casual observer, but potent to the intended recipient. You would pour your very soul into a paragraph, agonizing over each turn of phrase, each carefully chosen adjective. Was it too fervent, too restrained? Was your passion evident, or did you sound merely polite? You'd cross-reference your spelling with a diligent, almost obsessive attention to detail, knowing that a single misspelled word could undermine your carefully constructed image of refinement. And then the true battle began, hoping you didn't sound too desperate, too forward, or conversely too aloof. The delicate balance was everything. A letter was a performance, a carefully orchestrated display of emotion, wit, and intention, all designed to elicit a specific desired response. Once penned, the physical act of preparing the letter for delivery was another ritual. You'd fold the parchment with an almost ceremonial care, ensuring the creases were sharp, the edges neat. Then the molten wax, dripping in a slow, viscous glob onto the precise point where the folds met. And finally, the press of your personal seal, a crisp impression that bespoke ownership and authenticity. Each step was fraught with a silent prayer that a younger brother, notorious for his boundless curiosity, wouldn't intercept it and open it out of sheer boredom, or that it wouldn't fall into the hands of a gossiping servant, or worse still, a rival suitor. Then came the waiting, the excruciating, heart-stopping, endless waiting. You'd reread your own rough copy, or even the original if you'd made a duplicate 14 times, 15, perhaps 100. Searching for hidden meanings, for missed nuances, for any sign of impending doom or glorious success. Every rustle of leaves outside, every distant carriage wheel on the lane, every knock at a neighbouring door would send a jolt of adrenaline through you. The letter had left your hands, and now your fate rested in the unpredictable currents of Tudor communication, entirely at the mercy of chance, curiosity, and the swiftness of another's hand. A poorly written letter, a misjudged tone, a clumsy turn of phrase, these were not minor indiscretions. In a society where reputation was everything, a single, ill-conceived piece of correspondence could tank your social standing, staining your name with awkwardness or even impropriety. A reputation once tarnished by a perceived lack of grace or an unseemly forwardness was incredibly difficult to mend. Whispers could travel faster than any post rider, and a single faux pas could become the stuff of drawing-room amusement, rendering you an object of ridicule rather than admiration. The discovery of love letters, especially those penned in secret or expressing illicit affection, carried truly dire consequences. If caught, a clandestine correspondence could mean forced separation, a swift and unceremonious end to the burgeoning romance. In some cases, If the families were keen to avoid scandal and preserve honour, it could even lead to a fast, perhaps unwelcome marriage. A hasty union forged not out of love, but out of necessity and a desperate scramble for propriety. The very act of writing, intended to bring two souls closer, could instead violently tear them apart or bind them together in a manner neither had truly desired. The advent of the printing press, while a marvel of the age, brought its own unique set of perils to the world of romantic verse. Poems once circulating discreetly amongst a select few could suddenly be made public, appearing in collections or broadsides for all to read. More than one ambitious courtier, seeking to impress a noble lady, found himself falling from grace, or worse, becoming the object of public scorn, thanks to poorly disguised love verses that thinly veiled the identities of their subjects, or, even more disastrously, betrayed a lack of poetic skill. The private sentiments, intended for one, became public spectacle, turning personal longing into societal fodder and romantic ambition into professional ruin. Now, as the long Tudor night draws in, and the last embers in the hearth glow faintly, close your eyes, drift. Imagine sealing a letter with hands that tremble just slightly, your heart hammering against your ribs. You send this fragile piece of yourself, your carefully chosen words, your deepest hopes, across a vast, uncertain landscape, over a windswept moor, through a dense wood, into the unpredictable hands of fate, and you pray. You pray it doesn't fall into a puddle, its ink dissolving into an illegible smear. You pray it doesn't fall into the wrong hands, becoming fodder for gossip or a weapon in a social skirmish. Tudor romance, you see, was part exquisite poetry, part agonizing paranoia. It was a dance of hidden meanings, of subtle gestures, of the terrifying vulnerability of committing your innermost feelings to paper. And yet, somehow, amidst the fear of smudged seals, misspelled words, and prying eyes, it worked. Love found a way, transcending the physical barriers, the social strictures, and the sheer logistical challenges of communication. It blossomed in the carefully chosen words, in the delicate fold of parchment, in the unspoken promise of a returned letter. Just don't forget the wax.